Evening, everybody. How are you?
Wonderful.
I'm fine. Certainly nobody's complaining about the weather, right? Oh, no, we love this weather. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We are in the book of First Peter, so if you'd like to turn over there, that would be wonderful. You'll be able to follow along pretty nicely. If you have your Bible open, same place I have my Bible open. First Peter chapter 5, we're talking about elders here. And if you've been here the last couple classes, you know that we're taking our sweet time with it, but I think it's necessary. We talked last class in verse number 2 about we talked a lot about what it means to was it the week before? Last class, about what it means to shepherd, what it means to be an overseer, right? So everybody knows. Does anybody remember what the Greek word for a shepherd was? That's okay. Do you know what the other English word that it's the same word is translated as in the New Testament? No, close. You answered. Okay, pastor. Okay, now what's the word that's sometimes the overseer is translated as? Yes, that's it. All right. So now we're on, shepherd the flock of God, which is among you. And might come back to that among you thing in verse 3. But then serving as overseers, and then we talked about not by compulsion but willingly. And we talked a lot about the difference between being willing and then having the desire, and talked about maybe some similarities there and some differences. Okay, so before we move on, does anybody have any questions about any of those things? Maybe you've been sitting on a question for all week and you've just been dying to just hit me with it tonight. No? Okay, well, that's good. Kind of good, I guess. I won't get hit. So now we're on the very last part of verse 2. Shepherd the flock of God is among you, serving as overseers, not by compulsion, but willingly, not for dishonest gain, but eagerly. Or in the King James, not for filthy lucre. This is a similar saying as 1 Timothy 3 in verse 3. So there you're getting the qualifications or qualities of a bishop or an overseer or an elder or a pastor. And then in verse number 3 of 1 Timothy 3, you see not given to wine, not violent, not greedy for money. And then actually, if you go down a little further in that chapter, verse 8, the deacons are also need to be not greedy for money. Deacons need to be not greedy for money. Why do you think that? Other than, just not being greedy and not putting money first. I mean, do you think there was a reason why that's in the Bible talking about leadership positions, both elders and deacons? You think there is a reason other than just, money is a root of all evil?
Humility. Humble.
Okay, humility. I say that's part of it for sure.
Well, they were in charge of it, so they had to be good stewards of it.
So they would have been in charge of money, maybe as a contribution that came in, or whatever it was, any material things that were given to the church as a whole that needed to be distributed in the proper way. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's good.
Don't want them to steal it like Judas did.
What's that?
Don't want them to steal it like Judas did.
Yeah, don't want them to steal the money.
It's supposed to be Christ-like, that's just the opposite of Christ's example.
Being greedy or chasing after material things like that, letting material things rule over you kind of that way. Yeah, yeah. Totally the opposite of being like Christ. Yes, ma'am.
It would be a big distraction to be focused on material things too, be a distraction from the flock.
Yeah, your number one focus ought to be the flock, right? Instead of the wool. Something like that. Of the material things. Yeah. What do you think of the idea that, I think all that's right. Like getting to a little more, and all of that relates to us today very, very easily too. What do you think of the idea that it's in here like this for those reasons, but also because there was a practice of, well, let me just submit to you that there was a practice of the early church to compensate her leaders, specifically her elders, because of the level of work that was necessary for an elder to do that would have taken them away from their normal secular job or whatever. What do you think about that?
Nothing wrong with it.
Were you aware that, you don't have to answer, but were you aware that that's a thing in the Bible? Let's read 1 Corinthians, now, 1 Corinthians 9. Now, I'll just preface this by saying that this is in the context of supporting preachers. We're all used to supporting the preacher. Now, to us to support just like a preacher, for us to support an elder like a preacher, that would be kind of weird, don't you think? That'd be kind of a weird thing. It would to us because, I mean, I know maybe you do too, have known of an instant where a congregation does actually support at least one of their elders or something in this way. He like kind of works full time for the church, just like the preacher would.
I've known instances where the elders are indeed paid as well as the song leader is paid.
Oh, wow, yeah. I've never known that before. That's interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. 1 Corinthians 9 and verse number 9. Now, this is written in the context of supporting preachers. We're going to give it another passage though. So 1 Corinthians 9 and verse number 9 says, "For it is written in the law of Moses, you shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain." Is it oxen God is concerned about? Or does he say it altogether for our sakes? For our sakes, no doubt, this is written, that he who plows should plow in hope, as in to get somewhat of a return. And he who threshes in hope should be partaker of his hope. And we can go on verse 11. If we have some spiritual things for you, is it a great thing if we reap your material things? Okay. Now, so I don't want to break that down too much, but I think you can see that the idea is that the church, we won't say paid, but the church absolutely was expected to support the one who's preaching the gospel there, at least among the Corinthian church. 1 Timothy chapter number 5 is one more we'll read. Now, the context is right in your face in the first three letters, the first three words of 1 Timothy 5, verse 17. It says, "Let the elders who rule well be counted worthy of double honor, especially those who labor in the word and doctrine." So obviously they were some kind of evangelist, some kind of teacher, some kind of preacher. "For the scripture says, you shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain." And then he quotes Jesus, which is not often done in the New Testament, out like this. and the laborer is worthy of his wages. All right. So now, I don't think we need any too much more to see that, all right, it was obvious that there was some kind of a practice, don't know how widespread it was, but to support monetarily or materially the leaders of the congregation. And there in 1 Timothy 5, it was elders. So now we're thinking about this, and now we go and we see that an elder is not supposed to be greedy for filthy lucre, right? Not for dishonest gain in 1 Peter. It would be really tempting for men to say, if they knew ahead of time, oh, is that a paid position? Sign me up. You need an elder? Absolutely. You mean I get to quit my, my smelting job, down the street or whatever, and I go and get paid from absolutely sign me up. So it would be tempting for men to just to say, yeah, I'll be an elder solely for the financial gain that they would get from it. And Peter is condemning that here. Not for dishonest gain, but eagerly. Now, congregations are not commanded to support elders, not commanded to support deacons. I don't even think they're commanded to support preachers. Obviously, I am glad that this congregation decides to support the preacher, right? Because what if you have it's not commanded, right? Let me ask you, is it commanded to pay the preacher? I got two people saying no. No, it's not. Couldn't a man come here and agree to work for this congregation and say, no thanks, I'm gonna work my other job or whatever, whatever, okay. So if it was commanded, he'd be like, no, well, God said we have to pay you anyways. What's that? Yeah. And it would be, so as far as an elder goes, it would be kind of odd for us to hand an elder a paycheck, especially if there was like 4 elders and you're only paying one of them. That would make it even weirder, right? But it's not. There's biblical precedent to do that. And so whoever it might be, anyone who the church supports in this way has got to be laboring for something other than the check, other than the food, or other than whatever it is however they're getting paid. Preachers back in the 17th or the 18th century, I guess, probably more longer than that. But in the Restoration period, where the big, in America, the big religious revival was going on in those years, you read a lot about those preachers getting paid with chickens and pigs and eggs, and you ride on your horse to go from a long ways, and you get the chickens, right? So whatever it is, it would be easy for me to say, no, I'm not in it for the chickens. Maybe some preachers would have been.
It would be a little harder to work a job and preach both.
Hard, yes.
I believe.
Yes.
If your main job is to be the preacher, you've got all that time to focus on study and preparations for.
Yeah, for sure, yeah. But it is done.
You can take away from that, so.
Yeah.
It's a good thing that congregations do.
Yeah, and I'm thankful for it. If I had gone if it was always that way, the preachers is actually just expected to work a job and to preach full time, it wouldn't be weird at all to me, because that's just the way it was. I knew what I would be getting into, and you'd expect that. But then for whatever reason, some preachers choose to just work a secular job and preach full time. One would be, Tracy Duggar down at the Crandall congregation. He works full time. I don't know how in the world he does it, but he does it. And I guess there's only a select few who in the world, maybe, who are capable of doing it and doing a good job at both, because you can have a secular job and then you're you're preaching, severely suffer, and the congregation dies out, not growing, this and that. Or vice versa, you'd be, whatever your job might be, you're always on the verge of getting fired because all your time is with the church. So that is very, very difficult to do. But the point is that, and I think why Peter is saying this is, you can turn to John 10, we're going to read something there. John chapter 10 is that the people who are getting supported by the church, they need to be laboring for something else. If this is going to be an elder, an overseer, a shepherd, then he better be laboring for something else. So there's a parable. Well, it's sort of a parable, but not quite. It's in verse 11. We'll read verse 11 and 12 of John 10 and 13. But it makes the point. So Jesus is talking and he says, I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. But a hireling, or you might have another word there, hired man. A hireling, who is not the shepherd, one who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf catches the sheep and scatters them. So he sees danger, he says, no, see it. And why he does that? Verse 13, the hireling flees because he is a hireling. He's not actually the shepherd. And he does not care about the sheep. Why was this guy, this hireling, this hired man in that job in the first place? For the money. He just needed the money. Didn't care about what the job was, didn't care about the sheep. And when something bad happens, when you actually need someone to be doing their job and you actually need a shepherd, the guy runs away and he fails at his job because he's not in it for the sheep. He's in it for the money. And so these kind of workers right here do not, whether they're getting paid or not, they don't belong in leadership. You know someone who kind of fits this right here, fits 11, fits 12 and 13, they don't put them in leadership because it's going to turn out bad. Any questions about that? Verse number 3, 1 Peter 5 says, nor as being lords over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. So verse 3, well, that last part of verse 2 deals with financial, it's some kind of material gain. This one is dealing with more with like the power or the prestige or the honor that might come with such a position of leadership in the church. So if you want to turn to Mark chapter 10, Mark chapter 10, then this really goes, so we're going to read 42, Mark 10, 42, but this really goes all the way up back to 35. This is where James and John were like basically wanting to be exalted over all the other guys. And Jesus is basically telling them, think twice about what you're asking. And verse 41, the other apostles who would be apostles, they heard James and John talking to Jesus about this, and they didn't like it. Like, what are these guys doing? Why are they trying to put themselves above us? But Jesus, he knows this, and Jesus calls all of them together. Verse 42, Jesus called them to himself and said to them, you know that those who are considered rulers over the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. That's not wrong, exercising authority. You're in an authority position, you have to exercise authority, but the thing is, like, the idea is that they were abusing it. You're lording it over, kind of hanging it over their heads kind of idea. As you said, that's what the Gentiles do. Verse 43, yet it shall not be so among you, but whoever desires to become great among you shall be your servant, and whoever of you desires to be first shall be slave of all. And then he gives Mark 10:45, is that awesome verse? about what Jesus came to do, but that includes all Christians and all roles. You want to be great, then you be a servant. And that goes for everybody. Elder, preacher, deacon, song leader, and then just to the babe in Christ, just put Christ on baptism. Everybody, if you want to be great, then that's how you do it. Be a servant. And so if a man, back over here in 1 Peter 5, if a man thinks by an elder, he gets to be the boss instead of a servant, that guy needs to think again, because that's not what the eldership is for. You're not the boss. And what Peter is condemning here, well, he's making sure that these elders don't slip into this, is the abuse of any kind of position, the abuse of authority. If they were the boss, who is the boss? You look in verse 4, who's the boss? Yeah, the chief shepherd. The chief shepherd is the boss. These shepherds are not the chief shepherd, that belongs to Jesus Christ. So they're not the boss. Now, and this kind of goes all the way, this verse, let's see, but being examples to the flock, you see at the end of verse 3. This kind of goes back to what we were saying last Wednesday about how elders or how shepherds are to lead. They don't do it by demand and point and demand to get this done or whatever, like some boss would or whatever, but they lead by example. This is how you do it. You lead by example first. So we've all probably had plenty of jobs. I've had plenty of jobs before I got into preaching. And, you know who your boss is. And, most of the time, I'm in this particular job that I was in because I knew I was in it for the money. I was the hireling. Isn't that why we all worked a job, at least at the beginning? We just wanted a paycheck. Didn't really care about the job, I just wanted to go and get the thing done and get the paycheck at the end of 2 weeks or whatever it was. But so I knew who my boss was, and so I did exactly whatever my boss wanted to do most of the time. Why? Because I wanted to keep my job so I could keep getting money. I wanted to keep my job, all right? However, that's not my relationship with my elders, and anyhow, any Christian relationship should be with their elders. Shouldn't look at them as the bosses. A Christian is going to follow their eldership's lead because that eldership is showing a Christ-like attitude in every single thing that they do, and every word that they speak, and anything else that would go along with that. What that does is build up trust. Your elders are someone that you should trust. They got the knowledge and they got the wisdom, and they're there for a reason. And so they're doing this, laying out these examples. Yeah, and I trust in them. And look at it. Look what they're doing. Look how they handled that. That is great. And that builds trust up. And then but that also builds a good brotherly relationship, right? A good Christian relationship with each other. And then the Christian ought to find, if they have an eldership like that, the Christian ought to find themselves asking, well, why wouldn't I follow their lead? Why wouldn't I? Look at how they're doing. Look at what they're doing. Look at how they're leading. This is amazing. I'll gladly follow them anywhere. And so that is far from. So never should we think that our elders, when we're submitting to our elders, it's like, well, we just kind of do whatever they say because they're the elders. It's not like that. That's not the way we ought to look at it. Far from the blind leading the blind, right? Maybe in some places that's how it goes. Leadership positions, the blind leading the blind. It's the guy. He's always up behind the pulpit, and of course, most people have a pastor, not elders. They call him the pastor when he's probably not technically a pastor, and he just leads the church, And they just whatever. It's the guy behind the pulpit, the guy who wears the tie or whatever, or he, does whatever he does to make himself look like a preacher. And then and people just follow his lead because, well, that's what this church does, That's not good. But the way it ought to be, not blind leading the blind, but more like the wise guiding the willing. Something like that. That's how that should go in the Lord's church. The wise guiding the willing, or let's see, the guided, guiding the grateful. How about that? The guided, our eldership's guided by God, and they're going to guide those who are Christians who are grateful to have such a great eldership, Christ-like eldership, taking the lead and being the shepherd and things like that. That's way on. Any questions about that? Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I'll just kind of comment about the structure of these 3 verses. I just like the three, not this, but that structure here where it's like, don't do it this way, but do it this way, or don't have this motivation, but rather this way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically like, don't do it because you have to, don't do it because you're motivated by money, and don't do it for the power trip, but rather be a good example, do it willingly, and, exercise oversight according to the will of God.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of flows very nicely how he wrote that, right?
Yeah.
Look at that phrase, then we'll get off of verse 3 here. Nor is being lords over those entrusted to you. And I want to remind you of the phrase in verse number 2, which the shepherd the flock of God, which is among you. Okay. Back in verse 3, you might see something like those, nor is being lords over those allotted to your charge. In the King James, it says God's heritage, with the word God's being added by the translator. So theos is not actually in the original. It just says lords over the inherited, the heritage, something like that. The phrase is implying that there a certain people, a congregation, a group of Christians are kind of given by God to the elders to take care of. That's the idea we should be picking up. God says, yes, I will give these people into your charge. Now take care of them. And you see that in Acts 20 and verse 28, where Paul says that the Holy Spirit has made you overseers. And this kind of the little bit of the idea there that God is given them, is making them shepherds, so to speak. You can't be a shepherd without sheep. So the eldership has responsibilities toward some people of God, not all people of God. Now, I go somewhere and I meet elders. I have a lot of respect for them, and I hold them up if I know, especially if I know that. Of course, you always want to believe that elders are they're the right men in the right position. They're doing the right thing. But I hold up elders, very, very, very the most important people on the planet. But let's say elders from such and such a place do not come over to this place and say, hey, let's start doing this and let's start doing that. Their eldership is over one group of one flock, and another eldership is over another flock. The idea that, and I know this has been floated around, it's in my head. I have no idea who told it to me. I don't know when it was, but I know the idea is floated around somewhere around here of having an eldership over multiple congregations. And that's a no. You don't want to start doing that kind of stuff. I'm sure that the intentions, when people suggest that or whatever, that the intentions are probably noble and good and sincere. But that's just not a scriptural thing. Elders are elders over their congregation and not anybody else. When you read in the book of Titus, chapter 1 and verse 5, that Titus was to appoint elders in every city, not one eldership over all the cities.
That's borderline dictatorship.
You're starting to get into Catholicism if you're going that route. And, I mean, that's one reason why I wouldn't want to do it, but one reason is you just don't see that laid out in the scripture. Yeah, and if you just pause for a moment, you can just think of all the problems that could possibly arise from that. And then when you have maybe the eldership, sometimes you have elderships, men should not be elders. And then go ahead and put them then put that man who should be an elder in a position where he shouldn't even be in over multiple congregations, and then just like, you're just layering it on, and oh boy, who knows what would happen. And I would say, and I would suggest, and I'm not saying this as an absolute truth, that it seemed like in the New Testament, at least in the very beginning, cities only had one congregation. There was only one congregation. You had the Corinth congregation, the Jerusalem congregation, the Thessalonica congregation. In Acts 20 and verse 17, we see where the church in Ephesus had an eldership. Acts 20, the church in Ephesus had an eldership, as with the church in Colossae and Philippi, and on and on and on. If they had qualified men, they would have an eldership. So the phrase implies that elders do have responsibilities directly towards other people. It's to teach them and to guide them in the right direction, to help them walk as they should walk. This would include, you got to encourage, encouragement for faithfulness. Elders need to be doing that. And also, you see, thank you so much for, I'm not telling the elders how to do their job. Thank you for doing the great job that you do here. And just thanks for being so faithful in whatever it is you're doing. Just thank you so much. Encouragement for faithfulness, and then discipline for unfaithfulness. I mean, why do you think a shepherd, what's the shepherd, what's he have? He don't just go out there with empty hands, does he? He's normally got some kind of rod, and it's used to do what with? Not whack the sheep over the back of the head, but it's usually to guide them and direct them, and sometimes you got to do a little poking with it, I would imagine. If I was a shepherd and had a big rod like that, I'd be doing some poking probably. But encouragement for faithfulness, discipline for unfaithfulness, and both of those, if the elders are elders and they know what they're doing, then it's all going to be done in humility, in the greatest of humility, and with the idea of being a servant in the back of their mind. Romans 16:17, I'll read these quickly. Romans 16:17, now I urge you, brethren, note those who cause divisions and offenses contrary to the doctrine which you learned, and avoid them. The brethren at Rome were encouraged to note those who cause divisions among the church. 2 Thessalonians 3 and verse 6, but we command you, brethren, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you withdraw from every brother who walks disorderly, not according to the tradition which he received from us. If a congregation has got an eldership, who in the world do you think takes the lead in those things? Who starts that up? Hebrews 13 and verse 17, it says, elders, watch out for your souls as those who must give account. When you put all this together in 2 and 3, it's, especially this last one here, maybe, in what we're talking about here with the discipline, it's a difficult role to take on. And so no wonder why men shy away from it. Most men shy away from it. Even if they are qualified, they will shy away from it. Because if they know the scriptures, they know it's a difficult role. But hey, somebody's gotta do it. Somebody must be doing it. And we must be raising our children, raising our young boys to be elders in the church. Preachers, fine, that's good too. I don't know what is more in need right now. Preachers or elders?
Elders, because elders can preach.
I know, because elders can preach, right? I mean, they should be able to preach.
Elders willing to preach.
Yeah.
And preachers can be elders.
They can be. It's not always wise, I think, but I think they can be, for sure. Go ahead.
Back to the autonomy of church. I can remember years ago that when some congregations were reaching out to start a congregation, had a few people in a different community or whatever, and they would send a man there to preach for these people. And I can remember them saying that that would be under the oversight of the eldership.
What do you mean, a guy sending someone, wait, a congregation
Like
sent,
we wanted to, we had some people in, say, Laurel Valley,
okay,
a remote area. And there's a few people there that wanted to be a congregation.
yeah,
But they didn't have a preacher. They didn't have anybody. And we had men here like Dean Jones that we send down there to them to preach with them, to preach for them and teach classes and do those things. And I can remember the church saying that that would be under the oversight. Yeah. Just going back to what you were saying, that shouldn't be. I can remember in the past that happened.
yeah. Yeah, that's a little sketchy kind of stuff.
I think that happened in the masses.
I mean, send it, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's something I would advise against doing that. Not advise, go send someone to preach, yeah, that's fine, but, as far as like, what does that mean, you know? I have to have a whole lot, like, you gotta tell me what you mean by oversight, you know? Yeah, I can see where that would do that. Okay, well, any more comments? Go ahead.
I think if you meant like a larger congregation that had a little bit more money available was going to pay someone to go preach, you know, remotely or whatever for a certain amount of time or whatever until they could get a full-time preacher. If that's what you mean by oversight, like they're paying the stand-in preacher or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, so that'd be considered like, I guess, helping.
Helping another
Yeah, congregation.
Supporting a tiny congregation.
Yeah, that's why I wanna know, like, what do you mean by oversight?
Yeah.
Oversight.
I mean, how could you oversee a flock that you don't meet with?
You cannot,
That doesn't make
you
any sense.
cannot do that,
Yeah, but if you were supporting them financially to get
yeah.
them started.
That's a little different, yeah. And congregations plant seed, they seed congregations when they get too big or whatever. And, that needs to be handled properly too, but go ahead, somebody have any more comments? Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, if there's gonna be any oversight, it should be elders appointed to that congregation.
Maybe elders go over there and just feed the elders there, if everyone's in agreement with that, yeah. Okay, if there's no more comments, we'll pick up with, verse number 4. Can you believe did you have a comment? Go ahead. No?
No, we've been 3 weeks and 3 verses, we're doing pretty good.
And boy, we caught up. We caught up this time, didn't we?
Yeah, we're working.
Yeah, that's for sure. All right, thanks for your attention and your comments. I appreciate them very much. See you next time.